Hey, welcome back to On Map, On Mission. My name is Scott Rogers, and we're wrapping up a series of conversations called Church Hurt. And today, we're all coming to the table on level playing field, and we're going to discuss how do we be responsible with the relationships we have with other people and try to help them and not hurt them when they're vulnerable. We'll be right back. So I said a few loaded words to get this conversation rolling. And the first was just basically, let's level the playing field and let's engage in this conversation around church hurt as just followers of Jesus who are in a local church, as peers with everybody around us. And there are moments in relationships that, this isn't just in church too, we realize this is everywhere, but there's moments in meaningful relationships where I'm vulnerable and you've said something that triggers me or makes me go in a weird direction or feel something, or I'm frustrated, or I've said it to you, or I've done something, or maybe I haven't done something I should have, then puts you in a tough place where you're like, oh, Scott's this and that. And you choose to engage me on it. And I see that you're vulnerable in that moment, meaning my response could help the situation and hopefully bring some healing, or my response could hurt and bring some pain and some church hurt. And where do we go with this? Let's maybe start with vulnerability. How do we help us out, equip us? Like, how do we know when someone is kind of in a vulnerable, I'm not saying they're weaker than anyone. They're in that place where, man, it's a sensitive, delicate moment, and how we respond can make a big difference.
I think there's two things, right? There's vulnerability, there's volatility.
Mm-hmm.
They look somewhat similar, I think. And you've got to be able to listen actively enough to discern where someone is. And if you can't discern it, my opinion is that you shouldn't speak into it. Because if I'm uncertain as to where somebody is as they share their story, getting into that position of correction or, hey, here's what you need to do, kind of fixing them with the word of God or whatever, it ends up, no matter how good my intentions are, it can be perceived as self-righteousness faster than anything else. And that's the part that I think we as church people really want to avoid. We don't want this world that already has a problem with Christianity and the way that we've judged the people around us. This is coming from people who have stiff-armed the church and stiff-armed Jesus. They love the idea of unconditional love, but they don't sense it from God's people, and so they're out on Jesus whatsoever. Like, it's funny, the logic in that, it doesn't pan out. But vulnerability means that someone is actually, I think it's meaning that somebody is coming to you and they are telling you the truth. They're telling you the absolute truth about where they are. Now, take that into the realm of raising a child. A child has no choice but to be vulnerable because they are 100% dependent upon mom and dad. And when you take that vulnerability and you do something and you're overly harsh or you're overly corrective, imagine the damage that gets done and has been done probably even in the three of us in our early childhood, because someone corrected us when we needed nurturing. Somebody harshly treated us when we needed love and tenderness. It's like for me, I was an active kid. There are times in my relationships with my parents that I remember getting punished for things I did not believe in my heart that I did anything wrong. It made no sense to me. So when somebody comes to the table vulnerably and says, this is where I'm at, that vulnerability is a gift. So my first kind of card that I would play at the table that we're talking is, hey, how about we get quiet instead of get loud? How about we just I wonder where Darren is in this moment. I wonder what Scott's really trying to tell me. If he's being vulnerable here, is this information that I need to steward and use? Is this just me being quiet and being, am I making sense in that?
It's huge. Just listening well, getting quiet. That's not easy to do, especially if someone comes at you with a lot of emotion and they're maybe saying some things like you this and you that and you did this. And my natural instinct, and maybe it's normal, is, well, I want to do, okay, I'll defend myself, but you're saying we've got to choose to just step back and listen well and not defend and try to understand.
Ugh. It's so hard, man.
But honestly,
it's so hard.
Vulnerability is giving you access to something behind it.
Mm-hmm.
If I say something and it triggers you to me, what I said triggered something in your past. So when you tell me you this and you that and you this and you that, I've got to be mature enough to know, that wasn't me. But I don't have to say that.
Yeah.
They're not threatening me with their words. It's simply, no, they're misconstrued here, and their pain and their trauma and their hurt from some situation all the way back to when they were 12, for all I know, is leading the conversation right now. Brain science will tell you their amygdala has been tripped, and they cannot functionally. Why would in that moment, is that an appropriate time for me to come back at them?
Yeah.
It's like, nah. No, at that point, get quiet and listen. And that's when I think you can ask some of the best questions. It's like, hey, have you thought of a time in your life when you felt like this before this moment?
Yep.
And you can actually take them back to a place where it's like, yeah, actually, because you got to get out of the moment to be able to speak into that stuff.
Yeah, one of the things that Ashley and I learned in our counseling stuff that we did together was, and you would think that as a grown human adult man, this wouldn't have been new information. But it was, I had never, I don't know if I had ever really listened to understand during conflict. I only listened to set up my next point. And so you saying, there's so much truth in when you said this is coming from somewhere way back, right? Or it's possibly even coming from, maybe a sin issue, something that's just negative that's there. And for us to be willing to really listen and having understanding as the goal, not having defense as the goal, not having my own validation as the goal. Because all of us we've got this strong desire to be validated, right? Whether we're right or wrong, we really want to be validated and we want to be understood, even if we're off. Even if we're off, I still want to be at least understood. Can you at least see how I would be feeling like this? And if you're not willing to, if you just put up no, man, I can't. I don't see how in the world you got there. Well, then it's over. Like we're getting nowhere. We're not. But if you go, yeah, I can totally see how you would come to that conclusion. I can totally see how you would have that emotion. Totally. And then another thing that we learned is once we're listening to understand this other person in the conflict, and we can validate their emotions for them, like I can look at you and go, I can totally understand, Matt, why you would be feeling like this and why you're saying this. And I would imagine that made you angry. I would imagine it made you jealous. I would imagine it made you a little bitter. I imagine there's some resentment in you. And when you start hearing that I know the words that you're feeling, man, I'm telling you, just incredible progress can be made.
That's really helpful. Listening well, listening for understanding, and maybe reflecting back to them, affirming that, oh, okay, I'm seeking understanding. I would feel the same way, that kind of thing. How do we, if we go from there, how do you begin to ask questions that helps someone and doesn't hurt them? Like you've done the listening, you're beginning to understand, you're reflecting to them that you are seeking understanding. What are some of the, do you have any questions that you might go to, like in general, to get the other person to process the situation maybe a little more objectively that helps them?
You got to be careful, because anytime if you take curiosity out of the equation, then you're in danger of manipulation.
Yep.
So if I ask a question and I'm not curious,
You're driving.
now I'm
to a direction.
I'm trying to get you to
That's
do
a
something.
good point. Mm-hmm.
So I would be careful if it's a question mark, then make sure it's a real question.
Yeah.
If it's not, the Holy Spirit doesn't need me.
Yeah.
So the transformation in someone's life is not between me and them. It's between them and the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes he does utilize those relationships and those conversations to help facilitate the change. And sometimes he doesn't. Does he need it? No. We always say here at the Met, you've got to do, if it's me and you've got to do your part. I have to do my part, and God always does his part. Well, you doing your part, let's say you've been vulnerable and I've asked some questions, curiosity. I feel like I know what you need to do next. I feel like I know what you need to do next. That's when I'll stop and say, hey, what do you think it is that you need to do next?
Mm-hmm.
Inevitably, it's going to be one of two things. You're either going to answer it, or then you're going to give me permission by saying, I'm not real sure. What do you think I should do? And then at that point, I don't have to ask a question to manipulate it. I can just tell you. But you don't want to put yourself in a position to where you're trying to guide someone with a question. Hey, have you ever thought about this? You got to be really careful about that, because driving it as opposed without curiosity, I think really, really gets close to manipulate.
No, you're
think I'm wrong in
just
that?
Watch any trial on TV. That's exactly what the attorneys are trying to do with whoever's on the stand, is they're asking questions to get you to a certain place. Well, that's trying to win something.
Mm-hmm.
Great point.
Like, we can't look at people that we actually care about and go at them like that. And I'm going to be real honest. I'm pretty good at it. And by good, I mean that's terrible.
Let me ask this. It's kind of a practical question.
One thing on that. I think the one question I do love to finish with, though, and I think it really matters, is, hey, knowing what I know, how do I ensure the protection of our relationship after this moment? What do I need to do to protect that's what I want to do in this.
So you ask that question, or you...
If I can remember to ask that question, I ask that question, or some semblance of that question. I want them to know, look, thank you for trusting me with the information. Number two, I haven't always gotten it right, but I do want to protect this relationship, and it matters to me. Mm-hmm. So in that moment, it could be, hey, could you help me find help? It could be, hey, could you just not share that with anybody? It could be a half a dozen different answers, but it lets them know, hey, I want to know what you need me to do to maintain this level of trust and vulnerability here. Because if I don't, and I've done this the wrong way, I've done the wrong thing with you. If I don't, then I can utilize that information in a way that is inappropriate or wasn't expected and shouldn't. It's too whatever. And before you know it, I end up hurting you as opposed to helping, which was my intent or my heart in it. Sometimes your heart in it, if you haven't prepared what you're going to do, it can still mess the whole thing up. Your intentions, as good as they are, can still lead you to failure sometimes. So you still got to be really careful.
Yeah. How do we keep ourselves in that posture on a consistent basis as individuals? Meaning, how do I stay in that place where I'm quick to listen well, or I'm quick to seek understanding, or I'm quick to not manipulate through questions, but to remain genuinely curious and caring for the other person? I'm kind of leaning to... I feel like I'm manipulating the question, trying to get you somewhere.
He's doing it right now.
Yeah.
Court case right
I want to read the answer.
Hey, are we being recorded right now?
Do y'all have the...
Is this on tape somewhere?
I need my computer. I didn't know I had answers.
Speaking, you guys, like from a spiritual standpoint, not to say all the other stuff isn't, because that's very spiritual in the sense of the right heart, the right attitude, the right posture. But how do you do that 7 days a week? Like, how do you keep yourself in that place where you're able to consistently help and not hurt? Like,
I've never done it 7
I
days
have
in a week.
definitely never gotten
not one
seven.
time.
There's never
Maybe
been
2 days. Maybe 2 days.
What
in a
I
week.
try to do is
But, I
every
mean,
other day.
you got to give me Jesus somewhere in all of this, right?
Yeah.
If the point is to be right and to be the focal point and to make sure that I'm in a unique role, right? As the senior pastor of a church, people look to me for things. Okay, fine. if my whole motivation is maintaining the posture of that position above all else, I'm going to miss it.
Mm-hmm.
Each person that I come into contact with, if I can remind myself how much that man or woman or child belongs and means to God, and that their step along the way, if is my goal, is just to help them move, and in doing so, sometimes I help myself move. Mm-hmm. If I can just keep that in mind, Darren isn't where I am, and you're not where he is, or where I am, or I'm not where you are. But Darren, if Darren could take a step today, and Darren invites me to lunch, and we process something, and it allows both of us to move, he feels validated and valued, and so do I. And if I can maintain that posture, that everyone, when they're in our presence, they're moving in the right direction. I think that is a great motivator for keeping hurt out of the equation. It's still going to happen. There's still going to be fumbles on the play.
It'll minimize it, though, or reduce it a lot. Yeah.
But if it is, I have to protect my position. Yeah. I have to protect my reputation. Right. It's over then before it even starts.
Sure. That's good.
That's my opinion on that.
Darren, what are your thoughts? And we're going to wrap this one up.
I would take your answer and
throw it out,
and I would just probably delete it from the. No, just kidding.
Thanks for being. I thought you were serious. For me.
I set that one up. I would say, you look at the passage where it says Jesus looked out on the crowd and had compassion for the people. After you go through some pretty significant hurt and find healing, you said this earlier, Scott. I do believe that if we're abiding, if we're doing if we're walking closely with the Lord, then more times than not, we will look at people with compassion. So to your point of seeing people that need, seeing people that struggle, we just have to be willing to do that. We have to set ourselves up to be able to do that, whatever that looks like. For me, it's to continue to work on my own self, continue my counseling, continue to get me where me needs to be, right? And then when I'm walking through a room, I am looking at people differently. I'm looking at people just going, man, these people have problems, same problems I got. Their kids don't act right. Their spouse doesn't act right. They got money problems. They got bad relationships at work. They hate their boss. They hate their job. I mean, that's how I see people. And it's not a cynical view. It's just, I feel more realistic view of where people actually live day to day. And if I know that when I'm in a conversation or when there's a situation where there's conflict, if I'm compassionately looking at them and I'm truly trying to understand what's going on, I think we're going to have healthier relationships. I think we'll have healthier church, healthier small groups, maybe even translate into healthier workplaces. So I think that's a big one, man. We gotta not see people as the enemy. We gotta not see people as in the way of where we're going. Just see people the way Jesus saw them. That was a big time Jesus juke right there, wasn't it?
It was. I appreciate you guys, Darren, Matt. Thanks so much. I hope these conversations are helpful to a lot of folks. I know they've been good for me. Appreciate you guys. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on our next episode of On Map on Mission.